Niall, hey,
Hello.
congratulations on your new film, Four Letters of Love.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
You know what? I love these Irish dramatic stories, but and you wrote the book back in 1997. Can you tell us what actually sparked you to write this book back then to make this your first novel?
So the novel was probably born out of its first sentence. So one day I had a sentence that just came into my head out of the blue, and that was the first sentence of that novel. And the sentence it reads, "When I was 12 years old, God spoke to my father for the first time." Now, I had that sentence and I wrote it down. I said, "That's a good first sentence." And I had no idea what the second sentence was. And each day for about 6 weeks, I would go into a room at the front of the house here and write that sentence and then wait for the rest of it and nothing. My kids, who were small at the time, would say, "How's the writing going, Daddy?" I'd say, "Yeah, it's tricky at the moment, but okay." So I kept writing that sentence, not yet knowing that actually it reflected a major decision that shaped my own life, which is I grew up in Dublin, met Chris, who was an American studying there, and then we got married and lived in New York for 5 years. And after 5 years in Manhattan on April Fool's Day, 1985, we got off the commuter train and said we didn't feel we were living our own lives. We were living a life that was taking us into the city every day and back. We'd be home in the evening tired, get up the next day in the dark, take the train with the beautiful people into Manhattan, and so on. And you could close your eyes on that train and wake up 5 years later, and you'd still be doing exactly the same thing. You might be going to a better office, perhaps. You might have a higher salary, but you'd still be on that train. And so that wasn't the life that we had set out to have when we got married. And so on April 1st, 1985, we left New York and we moved to the four-room cottage here in the west of Ireland, County Clare, that Christine's grandfather had left to go to America in 1912. And we came to answer the question, do you have any talent?
Hmm.
Chris wanted to write and paint, and I wanted to write. And we knew that we would never get to answer that question in New York. Lives would be too busy, and we just would never answer it. And 10 years would go by, and we'd say, "Oh, I must write a novel," or you'd be retired and say, "I must now write my novel." So that moment that starts the film when William Coughlin is in the civil service office and he feels a moment of enlightenment of some kind and he thinks he has one last chance to live a different life. And he goes home to tell his wife that he's going to be a painter now, which is a terrible thing for a wife to hear because there's no money in it, there's no security and so on, and all the disaster that comes from that. So I think the novel began ultimately out of that life decision that I made in my own life to change change tracks, literally change tracks and get off the commuter train in Manhattan.
Now, in the case with the story elements of like tragedy and romance, did that actually follow you in life too?
Not in the same way. So it's not an autobiographical novel, but it's informed by my sense of love and my sense of that in the west of Ireland there was some kind of spiritual calling, let's call it that, which is certainly in the novel and in the film too, I think. It was important to me that when the film was made, that it got made in the west of Ireland, that we featured that some sense of that what going to the west in Ireland meant. Because as I said, I grew up in Dublin, and even as a child growing up in Dublin, I'd hear about the west of Ireland, and then we'd go on holidays to the west of Ireland, and so therefore you felt freer in the west of Ireland than you did when you were in a suburban Dublin. And in the same way, the literature of Ireland that I began to study then when I was 15, 16, and so on, Yeats and Synge and so on, they also chose to use the west of Ireland as the real Ireland, if you like, or some sense of something other that was ancient. And so I was drawn to that. So I think, um, yeah, that was always there.
Now, you mentioned Western Ireland multiple times, especially the fact that it's portrayed in the film as this beautiful coastal, the coastlines,
Yes.
the setting, and all this kind of stuff. As a writer, how do you absorb that environment to utilize into your stories? It's just something that it seems like. Western Ireland is definitely a character and a
Yes.
setting that needs to be portrayed for Irish literature.
Yes, it is. It is. The West of Ireland is a character in all of my work, really, but particularly first in four letters. Um, and I I came to that because I had moved here in 1985, and I didn't write the novel until 10 years later. So I've been living here for 10 years, and Chris and I together wrote four nonfiction books about living here. And so in that 10 years, I'm getting to know the people, I'm getting to know the landscape, I'm having an education in how to live in the west of Ireland from the people who live here. Particularly, all our neighbours at that time were older people, and most of the young people of my age at that time, I was in my 20s, they were trying to get out of Ireland. Ireland was depressed economically. It wasn't a place that people wanted to be. They didn't think there was a future here. And so you have to imagine this is an Ireland, before the internet, so that the remoteness of the west of Ireland was greatly exaggerated compared to what it is today. The telephone that we had was a wind-up telephone with no rotary on it to try to get the post office down in the village, who would then say, you want to make a call to America, for example, New York. They say, okay, hang up and we'll call you back when you're through. You would sit in the windowsill and wait maybe 20 minutes. Now you're through to New York. So that world was the world that we actually moved to. So its remoteness, which at that time could have been read as for somebody as frustrating if you were young and wanted to get out of it. But for us, it actually meant that we focused more intensely. We were free to focus intensely on the things that we wanted to do. In my case, writing, and for Chris, writing and painting.
Has
So the West of
Western,
Ireland. So sorry. So I think
yeah, go
I think
ahead.
the West of Ireland, besides the literary traditions of Ireland, like Yeats and Synge and so on, besides that, there is a sense of freedom that we felt when we were here to invent your own life, which we didn't feel elsewhere. Now it's possible that if we had moved to Alaska or we moved, somewhere, other places that were equally remote, we might have felt that, but we wouldn't have felt that sort of spiritual thing that I feel certainly, and I think Chris feels to some extent in the landscape here.
Well, I was going to raise the question of whether if you're still out there in Western Ireland, and has that world changed much?
It has changed on the surface enormously, but the people haven't changed in the slightest. I find. So I still find the same qualities in the people here as I did all those years ago. So yes, we still live in County Clare in the same place in Kiltumper, which is the house. We're still in the house that Chris's grandfather left to go to America in 1912. And so we have made a large garden here, and you're aware that you're working in the soil and in the garden that is the same one that Chris's family, the Breens, have been working on for centuries. So there is still a sort of physical connection to it, tangible, physical, real soil connection to the place, as well as the spiritual sense of it and the trees around us and what we're growing and trying to improve the soil here and things like that. So it's real in that way. But so Ireland has changed on the surface enormously, although I'm still speaking to you at the moment on an internet speed of 3, hoping that everything else, all phones are off and everything else is off so that this communication continues. So it's still at that level in this moment in time. Broadband is supposed to be coming, so waiting for that, the transformative moment. But yeah, it's still remarkably itself.
That is very remarkable. Now, Niall, you wrote the film adaptation yourself rather than bringing in a
Yes.
script writer. But I also know that you wrote plays. Can you talk about that transitioning? Because it's a different type of mindset trying to take a novel and put it into screen.
Yes, absolutely. Um, so I had written 3 plays before, which is the first time really thinking of story in three-dimensional sense of physical people and so on. And none of those productions was I happy with. So I felt that it's a miracle if you go see a play, as it is really if you go see a film and everything works. It's just a miracle that so many things can go wrong, so many opportunities for things not to work and to be out of your control completely. That was my sense. So I wrote novels, the 10 novels that I was writing in the meantime, before one day, Polly Steele, the English director, came across from England here to meet me in the house and say that she'd like to make the film of four letters, and that she would only make it if I would write the screenplay, because she didn't want to go off with some other screenwriter and become something else. Because, as you know, the structure of the novel is quite difficult. It's not a straightforward screenplay type novel. You say, oh, yeah, A, B, C, it goes along like this. There's two storylines, one in the east and one in the west, urban and rural, the male one, the female one. It's quite tricky. Um, to try to create that fated sense of the stories joining, but is in fact the way I think all of us who've ever fallen in love with somebody, it's two stories always that become one. And at the one time, and the one reading of it, you can say, well, we fall in love with the person we fall in love with. Is it just random? We just happen to be there at that moment? Or is there some sense that we all look for, I think, which is some meaning in life, which is comes from the fact that there's some purpose in my love for you, not just random moment that we happen to meet. It's not just chance. So the novel is exploring that, and then the film explores that too. But with Polly, I got to work. We worked on it for 6 years between the time she first came to the house here and by the time it's now on screen. And so it was a wonderful experience because uh, Polly loved the novel and was fight for things which I would want to take out. So I
Hmm.
would leave it out of the screenplay, and she would say, "No, no, no, we have to put this in. It's in the novel. Well, I want this in." And so it was the opposite of what you might expect, where, the screenwriter would be saying, "Oh, it's my novel and I'm precious about it." I wasn't precious about it at all. The tricky part in adapting the novel was that I'm now 67, and I wrote the novel before I was 40. And I wanted the film still to honor the novel and not be a film of a 67-year-old man who's had, years of life experience behind him, and then would change some of the things that in your youth you thought were fine, or the intensities of it, the emotionality of it, that I would soften those perhaps now as a 67-year-old. But I wanted it to say, no, well, actually, the readers, a novel is published in 30 languages around the world. I get letters all the time from people who are responding to it. And I don't want to, I want it to be that. I want the film to have some sense of actually what the novel is like. And I think I'm very grateful by the cast that were drawn to it and came to it. And, they also had that experience of wanting to do right by the novel, which was extremely humbling, of course.
And it's incredibly humbling the fact that you have a great cast in this film as they portray your story on screen. Is it everything that you pictured it to be with your characters?
Yeah, it's more than that. You can't quite, when you're a novelist, I don't think you're not quite picturing it as literally as it is a person right there in front of you. So, for example, there's a moment, if there are things that the actors bring to it that you couldn't have possibly imagined when you write the character. So you can't imagine when Helena raises her eyebrow to Gabriel, or when she twists her hand back on her shoulder as his hand is coming towards it, that she's just done spontaneously in that moment, and it speaks so much to their whole married relationship. Uh, when you watch Helena walk down the street, heading to the post office, and she just kind of march with her chin up and so on. These are things you didn't write in the novel, but they're better for they're fully realized. The character is a fully realized person. And so when you write a novel, the reader is imagining and doing half of the work for you of creating the character. You're only giving them the top part and they're making all the rest. The reader builds the character. Whereas here, the actors do that, and they have then, inhabited in a way that you couldn't quite have fully imagined. So it's a wonderful and, yes, you're humbling thing to see.
Well said. Well, let me wrap it up with one last question. I've taken a lot of your time already, Niall. But as people have a chance to watch Four Letters of Love, what is the most important takeaway you hope that they get out of the film?
I hope that they get from it the sense of that it's possible to feel that the power of love, the innocence of the power of love, that the moment that when you did fall in love or fall in love with somebody, that the innocence in which it seems to you that the world fits together, that the world is not random always, that, in the end lines of the film, when he says, yes, there is grief and suffering and loss, but also love, and to accept that that's an equal reality and a powerful one. That's what I hope they get from the film.
Well, you are an incredible storyteller. Niall, thank you very much for speaking to us about Four Letters of Love.
Thank you so much. Been a pleasure.